My name is Dave Helgeson. I want to welcome you back to the series we're doing on boondockings, on the what's, where's, why's, and when's of boondocking. In the first installment, we talked about what boondocking is and why RVers would want to go boondocking. In this installment, we're going to talk about public lands where you can boondock. So let's get started. So where can you find the boondocks? That's a good question. On public lands. Now there's two public lands you want to focus on. One is federal lands and one are state lands. Let's take a look. The boondocks are primarily out west. This chart here shows who owns the west. This is a federal land as a percentage of total state land area. Now keep in mind, this is just federal land. It's not factored into state land, such as fish and wildlife areas, state parks, DNR lands, and the like. So you can see the west has a lot of public lands available, and there are opportunities throughout the rest of the country as well. So let's take a look at federal land agencies. We have several that offer boondocking opportunities. First one is the BLM, that's the Bureau of Land Management. We have the United States Forest Service. Bureau of Reclamation, typically spots you're going to camp are going to be operated by the U.S. Corps of Engineers. Department of Defense, don't laugh, there are opportunities there as well. United States Fish and Wildlife is another option. National Park Service, many people think, well, there's nothing there, but there are options, and I'll show you there. And the Tennessee Valley Authority has quite a bit of federal land as well that offers some camping opportunities. So this next chart, this shows federal land within the USA. The first chart I showed you showed percentage of the land mass. This actually shows you where that land is located on the map, and it shows you which agencies control it. So down here you see the color chart. You have the Bureau of Indian Affairs, that's these colors here. Being that each tribe is its own sovereign nation, they do allow dispersed camping or boondocking, but you do need to typically get a permit from the agency. So I'm not going to really talk much about that. Bureau of Land Management, that's the BLM. That's a huge one in the west. Bureau of Reclamation, Department of Defense, blue. Fish and Wildlife in the orange colored. Forest Service, National Park Service, and Tennessee Valley Authority. So that's the main federal agencies we'll be looking at. Again, that does not include state land, and we'll touch on that as well. So where can I boondock? Typically, you can boondock. Government will always talk about dispersed camping or primitive camping. So when you're on their websites, look for those keywords. For 2 weeks, most anywhere on BLM land or U.S. Forest Service land, as I just mentioned, some national parks and national monuments also permit boondocking. And the one you don't want to forget is the state lands as well. The western state lands, as well as across the rest of the U.S., have a lot of public land that have boondocking opportunities on them. So let's take a look. Now I'm going to have a lot of screenshots of different websites I'm going to show you today. At the end of this episode, we'll give you a link to the websites so you can go research them on your own. And typically, as I go through this, just keep in mind, you look at the land agency you want to find or camp on. Google that land agency as well, the words dispersed camping, and you'll typically land on a page very much like this. You see dispersed camping right here. So if you were to Google Utah BLM for the St. George area, you'd probably land straight on this page. So not so much getting the links from us, but learning how to find them on your own, because each agency, the rules differ a little bit. There's not one umbrella agency for the BLM or Forest Service that's all encompassing for all the lands they control. So Bureau of Land Management, typically camping on public lands away from developed recreational facilities, referred to as dispersed camping. That's the key words you want to keep in mind. Talks here about the 2-week limit. After 2 weeks, you got to move 25 miles, and there's a 28-day continuous occupation. Just need to know the rules. We're going to talk about the rules way more in depth in a future session. The main thing we're talking about today is what federal lands are available, and typically finding that page that tells you how long you can stay there, and this confirms that boondocking is allowed. Long-term visitor areas, LTVAs. If you've heard about boondocking before, you've undoubtedly heard about Quartzsite, Arizona. A lot of people go down there for the whole winter and boondock. There are what they call long-term visitor areas where you can stay for periods up to 7 months. There's a number of them in California and Arizona. I believe it's $180 right now. You can stay for 7 months. You can get a 30-day pass for 40. If you're just getting out into boondocking and don't feel like doing it by yourself, this is a great start. It's maybe one of those short-term 30-day areas. You do get some services with long-term visit areas. You get typically garbage, maybe fresh water, a dump station, might be restrooms. Each one differs. Again, we'll have a link for this at the end of the session where you can go on and look at the different areas and see what they offer. United States Forest Service. As I said, each Forest Service district's going to have a page like this. See, this is Fish Lake National Monument. What you want to do is go on the recreation page, and you'll find dispersed camping guidelines. Again, if you just Google Fish Lake National Forest and dispersed camping, you're going to land on that page. Talks about what dispersed camping is. Many people enjoy the solitude and primitive experience of camping away from developed campgrounds and other campers. Dispersed camping is the term used for camping anywhere in the National Forest outside of a designated campground. Again, that's the key word, dispersed camping. Keep that in mind as we go along. It also talks about you need some special skills to be boondockers in dispersed camping. We're going to talk about that in a future episode as well. United States Forest Service, again, it talks about the best way to find it is go talk to a ranger. That is a good option if you're just getting down to it. You stop at a ranger station, say, hey, I want to disperse camp in your forest, where can I do it? They'll give you a map, or at least point out areas you can. Through the course of this series, I'm going to teach you how to find those before you ever get there. You can do it from the comfort of your easy chair at home on your laptop before you ever set foot on the road. So it talks about the rules, and we're going to talk about rules more on that. But again, just be aware where dispersed camping is the key word when you're talking with the federal or state agencies. Back in 2005, the federal government says each land agency need to develop what they call the travel management rule. Basically, what vehicles can travel on what roads in the forest. Each forest district will have a version of this. BLM will have travel maps, is what they call them. And you can order these from a district, or they're many times online. They're huge files. They'll take a while to download. And you can't see them all at once on your screen. You have to scroll on to get the detailed information. But they'll tell you basically where you can and can't boondock, as well as if you have off-road vehicles, where those can go, jeeping and the like. So what you get, this is the title page of one map. But they'll have these areas, dispersed camping. You see the dotted lines here. It'll say which roads are open to vehicles. And it talks about dispersed camping here and over here. Typically, it'll tell you how many feet you can park your RV off the main dirt road. Now, this isn't going to tell you where those spots are. It just tells you what roads dispersed camping is allowed along. So keep that in mind. Don't say, oh, well, that road says I can disperse camp on it, and blindly drive down a road with your RV, not knowing if there really is a spot, because it might just be open for tenors, or if there's a spot to turn around at the end. That's asking for trouble. But motor vehicle use maps are a pretty good option. I seldomly use them unless I'm really tight for potential boondocking spots, but they're out there. They will send them to you, or they're online with most land agency districts. Army Corps of Engineers, another federal agency we talked about. You talked about, here's the Portland district site. They have a lot of land along the Columbia River. Talks right here, camping. Half the camping options are campgrounds. The other half are dispersed camping right along the rivers, typically below the dams. So that's another thing to keep in mind as you learn this. And just, again, Google the Army Corps of Engineers for the district you want, put the words dispersed camping in, or camping, you're going to land on a page that tells you what your options are. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Keep in mind there's federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife lands and there's state fish and wildlife lands. This is an example of a federal site. This is the Kafa National Wildlife Refuge in Arizona. This stands for the King of Arizona. It's an old mining area down there. Camping is permitted on the Kafa National Wildlife Refuge. Talks right here. Campers may select their own campsites and are limited to a 14-day period and 12-month period. So again, you see they confirmed that dispersed camping is allowed. A little different than Forest Service. You're only allowed 14 days in a whole 12-month period, where in Forest Service you're allowed 14 days in a 30-day period when you got to move, or BLM 14 days typically in a 28-day period. But it is allowed. Talks to you about getting firewood, the whole bit. So the rules are there, and then what you can do. So this confirms you can boondock in the wildlife refuge. Next up, Department of Defense. A lot of people say, you cannot boondock in Department of Defense territory. I mean, they drop bombs in those places. Well, they do from time to time. Some of them are a little more dormant. A big area is the Barry M. Goldwater bombing range down out of Yuma, Arizona. It's the largest unbroken landmass left in the lower 48 states of the United States. It's huge. There's old mines out, there's roads, there's old Spanish trails, there's lots of exploring to be done. Right here, it tells you camping is permitted for a maximum of 14 days in any 28-day period, very similar to BLM rules. Well, stay away from water holes and make sure your fires are completely out. This is interesting. When you vacate the space, they want you to break up your fire ring and rake out your tire tracks. You're going to leave no evidence that you were there. You just need to get a permit from the Marine base, and you're out there. Thousands and thousands of acres. Now, conversely, not all Department of Transportation land is open to boondocking. If you go down to Area 51, you're going to find a sign like this, and guaranteed if you cross it, you're going to have visitors really quickly. So know the rules before you go on what land is and isn't open to boondocking. We're talking Department of Defense. There's also some lands up in Idaho you can boondock on. It's kind of disconcerting because there's a sign that says, beware of falling objects from aircraft as you drive onto the bombing range. They don't say if those falling objects are bombs or airplane parts, but kind of adds to the excitement of boondocking. National Park Service. There are opportunities there. This is a screenshot of Death Valley National Park. Talks about the 3 million acres they have there. They have 700 miles of backcountry dirt roads that are open to camping under the following regulations. 700 miles of dirt roads in the backcountry of Death Valley. That's huge. It's one of the few national parks I'm aware of that does it. Again, it talks about not going too far off the road and the like. Just keep in mind, there are options even on National Park Service lands. Now, National Park Service also operates national preserves and monuments. A lot more opportunities there. This particular screenshot is of the Mojave National Preserve in California. They do have 2 campgrounds within the boundaries of the preserve. One they do not recommend you take RVs to. The other one is a little more accessible. But again, this place is huge. The campgrounds are quite distant from spots you probably want to explore. The whole area is open to dispersed camping. It talks about roadside vehicle camping here is permitted where somebody has camped before. And in the next segment, we're going to teach you how to go on Google Earth. You can actually see these spots from space, capture their coordinates if you ever get there. Quite often you'll either see an RV camp there or you'll see signs of camping. Quite often the resolution is so good you'll see the fire rings left from previous campers. So keep that in mind. There's some great federal lands. I mean, they've been designated as monuments by the federal government because they're special places. You can go on there and boondock. TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. Again, talks about the rules. Talks about right here that you stay on TV land for 14 days, dispersed camping. Instead of having to move 25 miles, you just got to move 1 river mile up or downstream because TVA lands aren't really deep, but they're just long along the rivers. So there's options out in the east, federal land as well. So we talked about the federal lands that are available. Let's talk about state land agencies. Most every state in the union will have some kind of state parks. Department of Natural Resources, DNR. Sometimes, like in Utah, state parks are run by the DNR. You'll have a Department of Fish and Wildlife. Not all states, but some states will have state trust lands are set up for earning incomes for the school districts to help fund the schools. And DOT or Department of Transportation land. Don't laugh at that one either. There are options. Let's take a look. State parks. Here's a screenshot of Nevada State Parks. Rye Patch State Recreation Area, that's just south of Winnemucca, right off Interstate 80. Talks about camping. There's also undeveloped campsites along the reservoir, and aka boondocking. Talks about a 14 limit here as well in a 30-day period. So right there, that tells you dispersed camping is allowed outside of their developed campgrounds along the reservoir. You just got to know how to find them. I'm going to teach you that in a future installment. DNR, Department of Natural Resources. Here's a screenshot from Michigan Department of Natural Resources. There we go. There's that key word, dispersed camping again. You Google Michigan Department of Natural Resources, dispersed camping. You'll land right on this page. Talks about dispersed camping can take place on state-owned land other than state parks. Talks about, hey, don't camp where it says no camping. And make sure you're a mile away from a designated campground. Again, so you just got to determine where those DNR lands are. And I'm going to show you how to find those spots ahead of time of where you can camp. Okay, fish and wildlife. Most states, that's 2 parts. They'll have fisheries and they'll have wildlife. So keep that in mind when you get on their websites. In this case, this is Quincy Reservoir in Washington State. And this is a wildlife area down in Nevada. It happens to also be on water, but it's controlled by the Wildlife Department. Both offer dispersed camping opportunities. State trust lands. Here's the Arizona Department of Land. They hold quite a few, titled quite a bit of acreage down there in Arizona. You have to get a recreation permit. I think it's $15 for a year. It's cheap. And it says, what does my recreation permit allow me to do on trust lands? Right down here, it talks about camping, limited to 14 days per year. So right there, it says you can disperse camp for 14 days. If you got that $15 permit, that's it's just slightly more than $1 a day. I doubt anybody's out there tracking your days use. I expect there's people that go out there for multiple periods and probably exceed that 14 days because when we've been out there, I've yet to see a ranger. But that opens up a lot more land to you on the state level. Okay, so let's look at the fish side of things. Each state has some kind of fisheries department. Here's a fishing access site for Montana. Talks about Big Pine here. It talks about no fee charge for camping or using a group area. You can go on, it's farther down the screen, there'll be instructions how to get there. You can go on Google Earth and see those spots in advance, get some coordinates, and navigate yourself to them. So wildlife. Each state will typically have a wildlife division. This happens to be Nevada. If you scroll on their sites, you'll typically find somewhere it talks about camping. Again, this is just a screenshot of compressed so you can see it. The Fernley Wildlife Management Area in Lyon County, it talks right here, camping's permitted. So you just get within the boundaries of that wildlife area and you're allowed to camp. Okay, DOT land, Department of Transportation. Some people kind of always scoff at this one. You know, in Washington State, where I'm from, they're all fenced, barbed wired, big no trespassing signs, but you get in more rural states, Nevada, Southeast Oregon, Utah areas, typically there'll be a sign that says the gravel is public property, do not take it. It's about the only restriction. This particular one is down in Nevada. As in the last segment, I said my wife and I explore ghost towns. We'd come down a highway over here. We wanted to go that way, but there's a spot we want to explore off that direction. We camped there for one night, dropped the RV, went exploring the next day, came back, camped the second night. So you see, it's a pretty spectacular site. There were no campground options anywhere in the area, so we just boondocked. So land boundaries. Now that we know what public lands allow boondocking, dispersed camping, we need to know more where those boundaries are located, because typically they aren't signed. So how are we going to do that? Well, I showed you this map a little bit ago. It talks about the federal lands within the USA, so you can kind of get an idea where they lie. If you're going to go down through Sacramento Valley, you can see there's pretty much not going to be much opportunity to boondock on federal land because there's no color shaded in there. But if you come down through this part of the west, you can see there's tons and tons of federal land to occupy. In fact, you put the state land back in Nevada, over 90% of Nevada is open to dispersed camping. It's more of a question of, you know, where can't you camp, because most anywhere you can. So let's take a look at that. This is a website you're going to want to refer to. It's called publiclands.org. We'll post the link at the end of the series as well, but publiclands.org. You can open this up. It shows 11 western states. You can scroll into area you want. You can click on land status here. It will light up the screen. Who controls what land? You can see down here, this is national forest land, here's some state land, here's some BLM land. So you can pretty clearly see, you can zoom in a lot tighter, where those boundaries are. So you know when you're on federal land. If you have cell phone service, it gets even better. Of course, there's an app for that. There's an app for everything these days. This is U.S. Public Lands app. You can search on the App Store. You'll find it. It's like $3, $2.99. It's a real-time app for your smartphone. You activate the self-locate button, it will actually start pinging on the screen where you are at. You can zoom way in tighter than this. You can actually see when you can cross onto those colored bands of land. You'll know when you're on BLM land. You'll know when you're on Forest Service land. As we've been talking about, here's the federal districts. We've been talking about Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service. They're all there. If you have cell service and you're not quite sure if you're on public land, turn it on, let it locate where you're at, and you'll know. No questions asked. And we're going to talk again about the rules of what you can and can't do on the thing in a future segment. But this will tell you where you've crossed the borders onto public land. If you want to stay paper copy still, most every state's got some form of gazetteer. Shows you where public lands aren't and aren't. Detailed road use. What you're going to want to look for is the national forest. In this case, we're looking at the Wenatchee National Forest here. And right here where it says National Forest Boundary, you can see a line that runs along there. You know when you cross that line, you are on Forest Service land. Sometimes there'll be a sign, sometimes not. But if you've done your homework right and do what I'm going to show you in future segments, you're going to have the coordinates in your GPS. You're going to know when you physically cross onto public land. And sometimes there are actual signs. Many times you go onto BLM land, right here it says entering public lands. You know when you've gotten behind that sign, you're free to camp. And you can see right here, we crossed the line and we picked the camp spot. In Montana, state park land. Right here, 7-day camping limit. It tells you right there, boom, you're on state land, you're okay to camp. This particular one's 7 days instead of 14, like we talked on a lot of sites. So this concludes the Where You Can Boondock episode. I want to thank you for watching. Again, we will post links at the very end of the segment where you can go on and find some sites to talk about. Thank you for watching. And the next installment, we're going to show you how to find those exact camp spots on the ground and be able to record the coordinates before you ever leave home on your next trip. Thank you for watching.